Hello friends, welcome to the next tutorial of this module. In this tutorial, we will learn about what is CSRF. CSRF stands for Cross-Site Request Forgery. It is an attack that forces an end user to execute unwanted action on a web application in which they are currently authenticated. So over here, let's also understand what is the difference between authentication and authorization. First of all, authentication confirms your identity to grant access to the system, whereas authorization determines whether you are authorized to access the resources or not. In authentication, it validates user's credential to gain user access, but in authorization, it verifies whether you are allowed to access those resources or not. Also, authentication determines whether user is what he claims to be or not. But in authorization, it determines whether user can or cannot access a resource. Basically, authentication requires a username and a password, but authorization depends upon various security levels. And yes, authentication is the first step of authorization because authorization is done after successful authentication. Let me give you an example. You might be a student of a particular university where you are required to authenticate before accessing library. But in authorization, so let me give you an example for the same. You might be a student of a particular university where you are required to authenticate yourself to access library. But in library, you don't have the authorization to go through all the sections. There are some restricted areas where you're not allowed to go. So over here, you're not authorized to go to those sections. So that was about authorization and authentication. Now, CSRF attacks specifically target state-changing requests. Means there is no theft of data since the attacker has no way to see the response to the forged request. With a little help of social engineering, such as sending a link via email or via chat, an attacker may trick the user of a web application into executing actions of the attacker's choosing. If the victim is a normal user, a successful CSRF attack can force the user to perform state-changing requests like transfer funding, changing their email address, and so forth. If the victim is an administrative account, CSRF can compromise the entire web application. So, under the pretext of doing something else, the victim ends up getting trapped and perform state-changing requests. So in our next tutorial, we will see a demo how to perform CSRF in our testing environment. So, thank you for watching this tutorial.